So we're looking for, and we'll answer some questions for core shadows where there's creases in the bag, darkest parts of the bag, with the 6B pencil. Then we're going to practice lightening up our pressure to fade out, because we're also going to create the midtones or the middle tones in the dark areas and reflected light areas. So remember that your value map is just a guide. Unless it's a definite wrinkle or a definite shape, you're going to kind of fade out from the lines. The lines are just telling you, and you're going to draw them. There's a wrinkle here. It fades here. There's a shadow here. All right. If your value has visible lines, you're going to apply a second layer in the opposite direction. So if it's liney going one way, then you're going to apply a second layer in the opposite direction, or a third layer in the opposite direction to kind of fill in. All right, then when we're using our blender, do we use the tip or the side of the blender? Side. We want to save the tip for tiny little pointy areas and edges. So we want to keep the blender as sharp as possible for small areas. So you want to use the side of the blender, and I'll review that when I demonstrate. Light value is actually going to happen tomorrow. So we're going to draw an arrow to number 7, and we'll come back to it. But I do want to point out number 8. So today we're only shading the dark parts. We're going to avoid the lightest parts. That demonstration will happen tomorrow. And so for some of you, it's like the whole top part of the bag or the whole side of the bag. You're waiting till tomorrow. You're just doing dark parts today. All right, so flip over. Make sure you have your bag out. So we're going to answer questions about your bag. And so you're going to determine right now where the darkest values are. And so I kind of squint my eyes and make them fuzzy so you can focus on just the dark parts. So for me, the inside of the bag, underneath a flap on the bottom, and then a back corner of the bag are the darkest parts. For you, it might be like a big wrinkle somewhere, probably the inside, or perhaps like a crease or something like that. So you're going to write down where are your darkest values. So I'm going to say inside. So if you can't see inside your bag, don't write inside. Under bottom flap. And back corner. That's for me. Write down where you can see your darkest parts. So I kind of squint my eyes and make them fuzzy so that I'm not focusing on detail, just focusing on value. All right, then the same thing we're going to do for the lightest part. So we're going to hop down to question 3, and we'll come back to number 2. Where's the lightest part of the bag? So for me, it's the top part of the bag, the top flap, and then this folded flap in front. So top flap, and bottom flap. So before I start to shade anything, I always take a look at my item and do some comparing. And so since you're having to translate color into a gray scale, a gray value scale, what I will often do is I'll literally hold my paper up to the bag and determine how light is the top compared to the front, or how light is the side compared to the front, or how light is the side compared to the top. So you're doing some comparisons. So flipping back to your value worksheet, which just so you know I'm collecting tomorrow. So if you didn't finish this, the videos are in Google Classroom. It's called homework. So I would look at this middle value scale, and let me move the bag real fast so you guys can kind of see what I'm talking about. Okay, that's almost my viewpoint. I would literally take your paper, and I wouldn't fold it, but I kind of bend it so just that value scale is there. So let's say I'm trying to determine how dark this back corner is. I'll scoot it over a little bit. And I want to determine, like, okay, how light would the top be compared to the side? Well, then I'd hold my value scale there. And I'd say the slide is probably like a 6 or a 7. And the top, because it's light brown, is probably like a 3. So then, I mean, you can write down numbers if you want to. But I'd probably say the top I'm going to use 2B. And the side I'm definitely using 6B because I need to get some of those darker values. So this is helpful if you're like not quite sure how dark to go. And you're like, especially, you know, we're going dark first. And then you're like, well, it's too dark because it's on a white piece of paper. But really take a look at your value scale and do some comparing. So I'm going to shade like, did I shade that part already? Sorry, I did some shading. I already shaded that part. Okay, so I'm kind of looking at the difference between this part and the top, which is not that big of a difference. So I'd still say that side is like a 5 or a 6 compared to like a 3, maybe a 4 in places on the top. So we're going to I'm going to say the side equals like a 6 or a 7. And the top is like a 3 or a 4. And if you can't remember like your notes, or you have a hard time reading your notes, I put like value scale. This last question we're going to come back to next week when you guys are actually working on your backgrounds. But you'll just be thinking like your background somehow is going to have contrast with the bag. But I like to get the bag on there to know how dark the bag is or how light the bag is, so then you can make decisions about background. And so if you have extra time and you're like, oh, I'm just going to start shading the background, let me just take a look and have a quick discussion with you about like ranges of value. Okay. All right, so today I'm going to walk around. You're going to get your final draft drawing checked before you start to shade. And some of you, I've already seen it and you are done last Wednesday. You're just going to start shading, and I'll come around and take a look. What I'm checking for is proportion. Did you clean up your drawing? Are you actually ready to shade? And dark lines equals erase to lighten. So we don't want dark outlines. Dark outlines make your drawing look really flat or cartoonish, and we're trying to achieve like a really realistic shaded look to it. So if your lines are heavy and dark, just use your pinky eraser and lighten them up. So essentially we want to get rid of the outlines, and I'm going to match that value of the line. So mine's fairly light, but you can still see it. I would say in here I started to get like a little bit darker, that I'll probably try to lighten just because that's a light part of the bag. So you don't want your lines very heavy and dark. All right. So I'm going to show you guys how to value map. So we're going to write first and underline value map. So before you start shading a section, you're going to value map it. And you're going to look for other little wrinkles maybe you didn't draw. Does the value fade out, etc. So I'm going to value map, just not pressing very hard with my 6B pencil, so I don't have to keep switching between. All right, so I am going to start shading. So I have newspaper padding, my project. Let's see, where am I going to? Okay, I'm going to go over here, I think, because my side is definitely darker than the top. And so when I say our next note's going to be a shade section by section, like this would be one section. I kind of go between wrinkles. Or up here, like this would be one section, this would be another section, this would be another section. For this one, I have like a big wrinkle right here. It's kind of hard to see. But so I'd probably make it a section up until that wrinkle. So I'm just observing what's in that area. And then I make this a separate little section. So in between, like your big wrinkles are like your roadmap to like where you are on the bag. All right, so in this little section, before I start shading, I'm gonna draw any other wrinkles that might have happened or I didn't draw the first time. So there's like a total crease that runs across the side. And I'm looking for, and I'm asking myself, is it darker or lighter below that little crease, or above, or to the left or to the right? And then I kind of have a little bit of a shadow and a crease and a shadow that comes down. So that's just a guideline to say, hey, your shadow kind of fades out here. And then that's pretty much, I mean, there's like a little bit of like a little wrinkle here. All right, so I'd probably do the second part. Let me get that line so you guys can see it. Let's see. So I have this crease here, and it's darker below, which I'm just going to look at. And then I'm going to say the bottom starts kind of fading up, and it's darker here. And then I get to that little crease, and then I have the folded kind of triangle part. Okay. So you can value map two sections, but I want you to like look closely, add other wrinkles that you didn't draw before, give yourself a little value map for ranges of values that you see. So you're really asking yourself, is it darker or lighter above or below, to the left or to the right? All right, so for this one, it's like, and then I'm looking at the difference between this section and this section. It's slightly darker along this line fading up. So slightly darker. Okay, then I have a crease that's a little bit darker, and it's really only slightly darker above on the right hand side. Also, I have this folder crease, and it's darker to the left. So I'm going to add a little bit of value fading to the left. Okay. All right, then I have like a shadow part from the crease above, and the side is darker than the top. So I'm going to fade down, and I'm going to put value into the shadowy part, kind of fading out, and it's darker along this part. So I'm going to clean crisp edge and then fade down. Okay. And then I'm looking for any other ranges of value. So there's just like a slight range of value that's slightly darker that kind of runs across this little area. So notice how I left some areas white, because right now this is the lighter area of the darker side. It actually is the reflected light, or midtones. For me, it's probably reflected light. It could be midtones for you. All right. So let's do notes before I blend. So you're going to shade section by section, and your sections are between your major wrinkles that you drew. So I'm going to apply I applied the darkest values first, and I faded out into the midtones as I was applying. You're looking for shapes of value. So I often think of the shapes, does it look M-shaped, W-shaped, Y, does it look like an X? Often your wrinkles will look like letters. So are there shapes of, or maybe it totally looks like a triangle, or kind of like a square. So are there shapes of value that you can actually shade inside? You're going, even in the dark parts, you're going to avoid lighter areas. So that's where I did not do any shading in the lighter parts. What kind of motion am I going to use to blend? Circular. And then before I move on from that one little section, I like to refine, clean it up, kind of fix it before moving on so I don't have to go back and touch it. And if you do this, then your project's not a hot mess and you have to clean it all up at the end, and you guys never want to. I would kind of fix and apply a second layer as I go. So apply another dark layer to the darkest area and blend, because we're going to use that graphite to move it all around. All right, so when I'm blending, so I want a piece of scratch paper underneath my hand. I like to keep the shapes of what's on here. So for example, this crease, I'm going to go over this crease and kind of fade out a little bit. I'm going to go over the edge or the line and fade up a little bit. I'm going to keep the shape of that wrinkle or fold, and I'm trying to keep the edge fairly nice and neat. I'm going to keep this edge fairly nice and neat, and I'm going to blend just in the shapes that I have first, but then that looks bad. So I'm going to go back over it. I'm going to blend again in those shapes, and then I'm going to use a circular motion with less pressure to then create the midtones. So kind of blend over again, and then I'm going to use less pressure and fade out to create the tone of the bag. And I really want that to fade out right there because it was slow transition. So I'm going to go back over that crease and fade out. I'm going to go over this slightly darker area, and then I'm going to fade out. I'm going to reblend that top shadowy part, fade down, and reblend over the little creased area and fade out. So what you shouldn't do is like, oh, I'm just going to blend over the whole thing. You want to keep the shapes because that's what's going to make it look like it's all creased and folded. And then just so you know, eventually you guys are going to get, probably Thursday or Friday, you'll get mechanical pencil, and we'll go back and get like clean, crisp edges in areas that need to be much darker. All right, so then I'm taking one last look at that area. Where's my darkest part? A little bit here, a little bit in the crease, and actually a little bit in that crease that I just noticed. Okay, so then I'm gonna blend those. So you only have to blend where you add a second layer. Then I do the same. I would like double check my value map, add in my darkest values, blend in shapes, and then blend over to create your midtones. All right, so if you're ready to shade, begin. And then one last thing, if you have another item, so I have my strawberry here, and I was noticing like it's darker on this side. This is the inside of the bag. It's darker on this side, slightly lighter on this side, but still relatively dark compared to the bag. So I did outline, but then I matched that line and faded it out. So if you have stuff in front of your bag, if you have stuff inside of your bag, or something's going to be coming out of your bag, you're going to want to go around it, and then we'll talk about shading the items like Thursday or Friday. We're just focusing on the bag today and tomorrow. All right, you guys. Make sure you pick little sections, value map before you start. Use your observation skills.